Warning. The following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Working on it. There you go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Says that we're live. My first time flying solo here. I have no producer today. It's just me, myself, and I, and my guest. So hopefully this will work. So looking forward to this conversation. Before we get to that, a couple minor announcements. Next week we have Rafaela Camara. She used to be head of partnerships and did a lot of work with Epic Games. She was one of the first people who started working in the concept of transmedia between the metaverse, the universe, social media, and all those things. She's going to kick off a few shows that we're going to do on the concept of transmedia because that's going to be a fantastic topic coming up. Then we take a week off. Then we go into December where we have some outstanding shows as well that put everything on LinkedIn yesterday. So if you're really interested in know what we're doing, please go over there and take a look at that. We'll keep announcing them as the weeks go by, and we keep adding major, really, really good guests. I have so many good plans for the next year that this is going to be outstanding. So I did all my free announcements and everything, and now we have to get to one of the shows that I've been looking forward to for such a long time. Unfortunately, we tried to do this a few weeks ago. Technology was against me, and this time we're in a better setup. At least my guess is in a much better setup. I'm going to bring her in so she can introduce herself and I don't destroy her reputation. Here with us today, the amazing, the outstanding, the one and only Liz Miller. And you're muted, so hold on. Let me unmute you. There you go. There you go.
I'm trying to imagine the scenario of so I don't destroy her reputation. I'm just thinking the hamster is now like spinning on the wheel madly.
Dude, you can do this on your own. I don't need you. You don't need me to help.
My own reputation, Esteban. I don't need your help, man.
You and I are the only two people that I know that for certain we can destroy ours and any other reputation without a problem.
Challenge accepted. Yeah.
Exactly. So thanks. Hey, where are you? That looks fantastic out there.
I'm in gorgeous Arizona, literally at the foot of Camelback Mountain. At the Sanctuary Spa at Camelback, thanks to the lovely folks at Barrett. They're doing Analyst Day here, so I snuck out for a little bit.
I won't tell them. You won't tell them. Yeah, thank you. I'm so looking forward to this. I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. Like I said, we had some technology issues last time. I was, when we did the show, I was staying in a small town that for some unknown reason, some construction crew cut off the internet access to the entire town. And if you want to know what it feels like to live without internet, it was actually quite sad. So, but I was smart enough to say, I know, I'll just work from my cell phone and use it as a hotspot, which obviously everybody else did, and therefore the bandwidth was like
the slowest hotspot in the world.
Yeah, it's like I remember ISDN days. That's how bad it was. So, anyways, but thanks for being here.
Yeah,
let's try to do this again. I don't remember what we started doing last time, but this is a good conversation. I want to talk about vendor lock-in. And, this is interesting for those of us in the enterprise stage, in the B2B world. Some of these projects are like, gnarly, right? I mean, the old days, CRM could take 10, 15 years to implement, $5-10 million of expenses. ERP could take 20 years and double that amount. Pick your poison, HR, operations, anything that you install, comes with a pretty hefty tag. And that hefty tag puts you in the land of vendor locked-in. It's not only for enterprises, it's for anybody who does any massive investment, right? So the thing is like this show is about helping decision makers understand some of the issues in more depth and come up with insights that will help them, understand what they're trying to do. So, to that effect, I would like to talk about the effect of vendor locked-in decision making, right?
Yeah.
So let's start with a simple, easy question. I mean, what is vendor locked-in for those who don't understand our lingo, our jargon?
I think that's part of the problem, right? Like just the complexity in actually answering that question is part of the problem, right? Because in theory, a vendor lock-in is where you're able to, for an extended duration of time, have that guaranteed contract or or that guaranteed relationship and engagement that ensures mutual benefit with a single vendor, whether it's across hardware, whether it's across software. I mean, it's kind of across both, right? But that you are locked into that rate where success is a foregone conclusion, and that is for a lengthy duration of time where the people along the way who tend to be the commodity are no longer the barriers to success, right? That you are locked in with that vendor, and that is the lengthy duration of your contract. At least for some vendors, that's what it is. For others,
Right.
it's I now have you.
Okay, that was gonna say there's two parts of it, right?
Right. There's the hey, listen, like we know that success doesn't come if you're looking like let's take ERP as a kind of an ideal example, right? Not exactly your least complex scenario of like, hey, this is gonna be so simple. You're just gonna transition to this new ERP solution. It's gonna be so awesome. You turn it on and all of your problems are mystically gonna go away. Right. You're really looking at a multi-year, lots of sweat and tears, lots of people involved. It's a very complex situation that you're probably walking into. In
Hmm.
that scenario, a vendor lock-in, when it's proposed to you as part of like, hey, it's really not a lock-in, it's part of customer success, right? It's part of
Oh
this
God.
ongoing, like, like ongoing
Uh,
mystical engagement. It sounds pretty good, right? Because the end goal of a vendor lock-in when it's proposed is really that this is a duration over time pathway to get to success. And you are here, we are in this together, boom. What it
so
ends up
so
being are shackles, where you are
okay,
stuck and you
got
are
it.
trapped in that vendor, oftentimes feeling like you're drowning and feeling like you are not only stuck with the vendor that may not be delivering success, but you're also stuck with increasingly growing terms where, oh, well, we're going to assume because we're so awesome, you're going to have to increase seat count, right? Because you're going to be so wildly successful. You have to guarantee you're going to grow at 5% every year. So all of a sudden you're in this lock-in that feels more oppressive than successful. So I think that there are so many different shapes and sizes of what
Yeah, yeah,
vendor
yeah.
lock-in means. It's actually impossible to answer the question in a way that doesn't feel both like
No,
optimistic
I,
and cynical and completely unattainable.
well, the thing is, you did a good job defining the problem, but now there's so many nuances to the things that you just said. So let's break it into two different parts. Let's
So
start with the
many.
vendor side. Let's start with the customer side first, which is,
Yeah.
that way if we run out of time, we don't have to like poo-poo any vendors, right? So let's start with the customer side.
Yeah.
So I'm a customer and I have a contract that guarantees me. Most contracts these days go between 1 and 3 years, right? 1 year
Right.
for testing, 3 years if you're committed. Reason for that is
Mhm.
because we want to sell you more stuff, but after 3 years, and we want to make more money after 3 years if you're the vendor. So we have a 3 year contract for the most part out there. So I'm locked in for 3 years into this vendor.
Right.
And I can break out of the contract, right? Contracts are never permanent. So I'm not really locked in because of the
Right.
contract. I'm locked in
And
because, yeah,
you're in the cloud. Like so I think that,
yeah.
you're in the cloud. So congratulations.
To
Let's
the
add that
cloud.
complexity. Like everyone move
Yeah,
to the cloud. Here we are. Now,
yeah.
but like in theory, it should mean you could move in a more easy like it gives you the illusion that you know what? And every contract is breakable and I can just move my stuff. So when you
Okay,
walk into the contract and you sign it and you're like, hey, this is actually really good value. Like, this is great. I'll sign a 5 year. Like, I've heard that. Like, I've heard that conversation. Or where the CFO will say, well, if we can keep it this low, what if we extend it to 5 years instead of three? Right? Because if they're
okay,
going to offer us this great price for this amazing value that we're going to get, extend it. Right? Because from a CFO perspective, I'm getting more for less. Sounds good.
okay. So let's take that one step further. I mean, let's say that
Okay.
that's the case. Let's say they have 5 years, right? I'm stuck for the next 5 years to this vendor. I'm committed for the next 5 years to the vendor. I'm not going to
Right.
go and find. I know that we're in the cloud and everything's supposed to be like great and everything, but we're not, I'm not going to go and make a decision for somebody else. It took me
Right.
6 months to a year to get here, right? So then I'm committed for
Absolutely.
5 years. So then, how does that 5 year commitment will affect my plan making, my strategy setting, my visions? Pick whatever you want, right? I mean, how would that 5 years affect it?
So Okay, are we taking the realistic view or the cynical view? I never know with you. Okay, so if
let's try to make it realistic, unless we do a caveat for cynical.
I know, because here's the realistic view. When you're looking at that 5-year horizon, you still are looking at year one as being that year of implementation, right? That year of getting all the plumbing right. Let's get up and running. And then you're trying to then look at your TCO across the rest of the 4 years, knowing that all the heavy lifting and all of the kind of implementation portion happens in year one,
Okay.
right? In theory, and when you start to look at that strategy
So
of
it's a honeymoon. It's a honeymoon.
The first year is the honeymoon. But here's what starts to happen and starts to kind of deteriorate. And it's why I think so many of us have that apoplectic reaction when we hear vendor lock-in, is because we haven't scenario planned the reality of what either this tool, this vendor, this solution, this platform is really going to do for the entirety of our ecosystem, the entirety of our planning. We look at year one as just this individual tool's implementation. We don't necessarily look at the processes. We don't necessarily look at all of the data that needs to come in, all of the other connections. We haven't planned for that ahead of time. What we planned for was that first year of implementation, right? We haven't planned for long-term success and what those bottlenecks are going to be along the way. So what ends up happening is you don't implement in that first year. You might get certain wins, you might get 90-day sprints and hurdles, but the totality of what you expected to start delivering successful return after your first year hasn't necessarily come to pass. In fact, you've had to lengthen out that timeline. Like, Esteban, when was the last time a vendor came in and said, we're going to be up and running in 6 months? And that 6 months didn't turn into...
Yeah. Oh, right? I forgot the last part of the question, right? Every time that somebody said we'll be up and running in 6 months, it's almost every time. But to be up and running in 6 months is a different story, right? So
it's like, I think that what ends up happening across the total 5-year lifespan is really hard for a lot of us to realistically look at, because our plans often get stalled in year one of that 5-year lock-in. So now all of a sudden we're at year and a half, we're at 2 years, we're at 2.5 years. And let's say in an ideal scenario for a complex enterprise-wide critical infrastructure implementation, right? We're up and running in a place at let's say successfully 18 months. And we're pretty stoked. We're pretty excited about that.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad layout. I mean, if you can get up and running in 18 months, yeah.
If you can get up and running in 18 months, that's pretty great, right? And you can then start looking at what those success metrics are for the rest of your 5-year contract. Then you can start looking at that. But I think what starts to happen along the way is things change in 18 months. Look at what happened in the last 18 months of just what happened in industry, right? All of a sudden, everyone wants to run around and go implement 90 different AI tools, right? Finance suddenly starts wanting... The business keeps moving forward, but the vendor lock-in contract is on the static 5-year contract. And with some vendors, they don't build in any elasticity for their contract. And so you end up stuck with a solution that worked when you first contracted it 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And now you're stuck.
But aren't you making it a little too complex? Isn't that like easier than that? I mean, you mentioned the cloud, and I think that the cloud is supposed to change things, right? I mean, that's how we go into this contract. We say everything's great for 5 years. You know, got a great my CFO is happy because I got to get it right. My business stakeholders are happy because I got what they wanted technology-wise. You know, and I implemented, like you said, a short sprint to like prove the concept in 6 months. It works. Now we're going to take another 12 months to get it done right. Then we can evolve it. My vendor is telling me how they're going to keep evolving and give me everything that I need for the rest of my life, right? So, I mean, is it really that drastic in the first 18 months? Or is it like, you know, honeymoon for the first year, post honeymoon, we got settled in the new house over the next 6 months. Now we live together and we're planning to have a baby over the next year or so, you know. I mean,
but that's the perfect example, right? Is it okay? Like we had the honeymoon period, and let's even be generous and say that the honeymoon is 2 years, right?
Okay.
But now we're getting itchy. Now we're thinking maybe let's start a family, right?
Yeah.
The complexities of what happens and what gets added on to the pressure of what got implemented 2 years ago. the vision for what got implemented 2 years ago suddenly got exponentially more complex because we've added a baby, right? We've added So I think that vendor lock-ins that actually work really well for both parties, right? And that's where I think we get really contentious about these, is when you've got a vendor contract, when you've got that lock-in that's really beneficial for both parties, it has to have that elasticity to allow for the baby, right? To say, hey, here's a baby.
Yeah, but oops, we got pregnant. The plan was 5 years out, and we got pregnant a year in. I mean, shit happens. What are you going to do, right? I mean,
but because that happened, do you now have to throw out the old contract? Like we're going to start all over again?
That is what I want to get to.
Contract?
Yeah. So that's what I want to get to. I mean, when that happens, I mean, but you have a 5-year contract. Yes, you can get out of the contract, but like you really invested, $1.x million and like a year plus into this.
Right.
And now it's like, shit, we're going to have a kid, and we were not planning on doing that for 5 years and buying a house in 4, but now everything gets thrown. So then how does the decision making on what to do, in that situation gets affected by the vendor lock-in?
I think that's where a lot of the conversations and a lot of the strategy planning that you had at the very beginning of that contract conversation, that's why you have to ask very, very different questions in the beginning. And you have to work with those organizations that are willing to say, hey, yeah, okay, you got a baby. How many more hands do you need? And yes, we have a flexible model, so you can still stay within this house. You don't have to throw out the whole house just because you got a new baby, right?
Okay.
But hey, let's change the room. And I think a lot of this comes down to, I think that people have gotten, I think it brings us to another topic, and I hate to pivot on you like this, but
do that, because I really don't know how to do that. I cannot keep up. Yeah, it's so hard.
But I think it brings us down to, I think it's very simple to say that the vendor lock-in is the problem, when a lot of times the myth of customer success is actually the problem, right? It's this mythical team that comes in before your contract is even, like, the ink is signed on your contract, and they go, these are the 10 steps. Here's the infinite loop where we guarantee customer success, and you're going to have a team, and the team is dedicated, and here you go. But what that team hasn't done before the contract was signed, or even if you're an existing customer and you're looking at ongoing success, what that team doesn't have is that operational reality assessment of, what does it actually mean that you had a baby? What actually needs to shift, right? Like, let's talk in reality. Let's talk in scalable terms. And so I think that the reality is that customer success is rarely successful. I mean, it's just the reality of it, because they're spending an awful lot of time trying to fix internal operational and culture gaps of, like, hey, this person didn't tell me they were going to do this, or I didn't want this contract to begin with, so I'm not going to support it. The reality of what our organizational culture and structures bring us, that those success teams are spending so much time trying to fill those gaps, that they're actually not keeping their eye on the operational ball of what business value and what business success looks like.
Well, there's also one more problem, actually, if you don't mind me adding to that, is the fact that like most of the people that you're talking to, they're in their early 20s, never got married, never had a kid. So now they're trying to tell you how your life is going to change. Yeah, hey, having a kid is not that bad. Having a kid is not that bad. This is what, like, the whole world aims to do with their lives. And you go like, you had one? Shut the fuck up, So,
right. Like, people in Sweden put their babies in a box. What are you talking about? Like, I think that the reality is that oftentimes we look at both the contract and we look at the success plan as these cookie cutters that work for every single organization, when we damn well know that's not what happens. And we know it. We all know it going into the scenario. But the promise of what all of this implementation is going to bring is so intoxicating. We want to get there faster. And so I remember looking at vendor contracts, and I would look at them, and the contract that's in front of you is the most important contract. Like, you kind of forget what the other contracts
Why do you say that?
Because you're looking at that one solution. Like, if I'm focused on, let's say, a contact center solution, I'm focused on that solution, and that's the problem. Like, that's the problem I'm here to solve. And so I'm going to solve it with the best hammer I know to bring to the table, right? And so me as the executive, me as the decision maker, that's the one I'm looking at. I'm not necessarily then lining up the 5 other contracts for service, for CRM, for CDP, for market. I'm not lining everything up and then saying, okay, well, what happens if one of these goes off the rail? Does it start to impact this one? I'm not looking at them in totality, and that's because I'm human, right? And I don't care what anyone says, it's just not going to
Yeah,
change,
yeah,
right?
but it is your job. You're human, but it is your job. I mean, you can't
It's my
say
job. But
you
what
can say
happens
I
when
have
that
five
isn't your
kids.
job?
You can say I have 5 kids. I'm gonna raise them all individually and separately, like the other
So
four
then
don't
does that mean
exist.
that the vendor, but does that mean that all of the vendor contracts then suddenly become the responsibility of the CEO? Because if I've got
No,
five, if I've
no,
got a
no.
head of CX, a head of sales, a head of marketing, and they've
Yeah,
all got their contracts.
somebody needs to be the aggregator of those. If it's a CEO in a small company, it's a CEO in a small company. But that's not how it works. In larger organizations, you go to a CIO that reports to a CFO that reports to a CEO. You go to a chief strategy officer. You go to I
But you
mean
and I both know that the wheels fall off that bus really fast. And you know who ends up being the person who's trying to figure out where all your kids are at night? Procurement. And
mom,
when was the last time that Debbie
mom.
and Bob from down in when was the last time that Debbie and Bob down in procurement were like, hey guys, strategically, this doesn't make sense for the
So
organization? No, they're like, oh, you didn't have something that was called this before. Sweet.
So before we go anywhere, since I had to deal with procurement extensively as I'm negotiating contracts, I love everybody in procurement to no end.
We love
And they're the
procurement.
best people in the universe, and they're very
We love
strategic in nature.
but that's
So
but that's what you just said. Okay, so let's zero in on that problem. They are.
yeah,
People in procurement are strategic. They are not
no, they're
given the
not.
information. They can be. They're not given the wiggle room to be able to be strategic because they're given the mandate to say, don't let anyone buy that.
But then,
Because
then, then
again,
they're not as
if you're not having
strategic.
the
I mean,
conversation,
there's a difference between the job and the person. I have nothing against Debbie and Bob.
right?
They're
Oh
great
no, no, I
people.
love
I
Debbie and
mean,
Bob.
yeah. I mean, Debbie's my best friend.
Yeah,
I send
Debbie and
her.
Bob, we'll go out and drink. It's
Yeah,
cool.
I send.
But their job is to be your roadblock.
Okay, so then we're kind of like going into different areas, but then
I know. Sorry.
no, which is good. It's the way this conversation should go. But then this is not an issue that you're locked in and there's nothing you can do. This is an issue the locked in is the locked in created by the red tape in the organization, or is a red tape a response to the locked in that was created for the organization by the situation?
In my experience, it's been both.
Okay.
Because I'll be honest, as a practitioner, I've seen the real benefit of a vendor lock-in because there's
Mm-hmm.
consistency and there is a sense of, even if it's misguided, there is a sense of security knowing I'm in this for 3 years. And
Okay.
you're contractually obligated to be in it with me too, right? So you're not, because I've been burned by the startups, I've been burned by all of those things. So there's a level of security in that consistency. But because we end up with so much red tape, and because again, there's a difference between elasticity and flexibility, right? If you have elasticity in that relationship and in that contract where it understands that a lot can happen in 3 years and priorities may shift and change, and that vendor is willing to shift and change with you, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
having the rigidity of saying, no, you can only flex in one of these two ways.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much red tape in that there is no way to get out of that 3 years with any level of positive feeling left because you feel like you're trapped. But when there is elasticity in that relationship and you have someone who says, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, the world turned sideways, COVID, shit. Like, you had something that happened. I'm going to actually shift and change with you so that the priorities that we laid out in year number 1 are not the priorities we're working on in year number 3. Suddenly your lock-in is a partnership and not a vendor lock-in. Like, it's amazing how we'll change the name for it. Like, I have a
I
vendor
like that
partnership.
idea. I like that idea a lot more. Then it's not a vendor lock-in; it's a partnership. We're both. I mean, look, some of us may have been married more than once, and some of us may know how these things evolve post-marriage.
Tell
You
me,
know,
teach me,
we
guru,
call.
teach me.
I don't know who I'm talking about, but I heard this from friends of mine.
So weird.
I mean, let's call instead of calling divorce, let's call it, I don't know, global pandemic, right?
Global, let's call it mutually acceptable
No,
dislocation. I don't know. We'll come up with something.
but if you think about where we are at a business level, right? The pandemic, it was the equivalent of a divorce in a relationship. Not that you would know, but let me tell you, it is, right? It's like there's a huge range thrown in the machinery that now like brought everything to a halt. And then, so what do? Right? So
Right.
I hate to keep referring to these relationships between vendors and customers as similar to a marriage, but Gartner did when they published the hype cycle. When I used to present the hype cycle, I used to say it was the marriage curve. You date until you think that is the best thing. Then you're dating all the way to the top. So when you get engaged, then you learn what it's really like, and eventually you figure it out. So
levels out somewhere in the middle of
hopefully it does. If it doesn't, there's a little precipice that we call divorce. So but it's actually a good way to actually make allegories that work, because essentially COVID, for all intent and purpose, a global pandemic, and let's not call it by name, which may reoccur in our lives, it's the same as a divorce. It's like everything changes, and now you got to figure out what you do, right? So then I love the idea of partnership. Go ahead, sorry.
But I also think of you think of all the bells and whistles that go before the divorce. So it's like, okay, so now I attempt to I bring in a marriage counselor. So I'm gonna go in and bring in some consultants and some SIs to try to make this work. And it's like we keep throwing all the things at it, when in reality, if you started the success conversation from a different starting point, that being based on, can I focus on the value that this partnership is supposed to deliver, that's defined in my language, not the vendor's. You start from a very different point, right? So if you start to look at organizations where even their, I don't want to call out any vendors, I don't want to pick on anyone, but if you start to think about vendors where if their success program for the duration of your contract is based on how well they deliver implementation of their technology, it's kind of that one-sided marriage again, right? It's like, I want to show how successful I am.
But if you're a vendor, that's your only goal, because if you have 400,000 customers, you cannot have 400,000 unique solutions. You still need to create your version of success. Is like, I will continue to deliver solutions that expand what you have.
Right. If your definition of customer success is that we kept the lights on 90% of the time, you're probably going to have a client that comes to the end of their lock-in period and they're like, well, everything else you promised me didn't happen. So are we really basing this whole level of success on the fact that 90% of the time you were there?
Okay.
So I think
that's a compromise.
Value conversation has to happen.
That's a compromise. According to therapist number 3 in my long string of therapies, compromises are good. It's actually what makes something work.
Right. But I think that compromise is part of that elasticity that I was talking about, right? Is that you can't only have one thing that you compromised on and call that agility, right? You can't say, but like, hey, you have to ignore the 99 things that were wrong, because the one thing I got right 90% of the time, right? Like, there has to be more of that bi-directional equity of what success is.
That's a stupid statement. I'm sorry.
Well, listen, just because someone loaded the dishwasher one time doesn't mean they did the dishes.
Yeah, but so I might have done some things wrong in my career as a consultant in my life, and I remember being once in a CIO's office having a conversation about the latest fuck up that my team and I did, and trying to apologize and say, hey, but you know what, we fixed this, and the guy said something that would stay with me for the rest of my career, and it will continue, which is like, you don't get rewarded for being the hero when you created the problem. Right. You get rewarded for being the hero when nobody else could figure it out. But you don't get to create a problem and then say, oh, I fixed it. And that's the thing. Some things like, this is one of my problems with a lot of vendors today. It's like some of the vendors, not a lot, some of the vendors are going like, so some of the vendors are going like, hey, this is really great technology that we have here that we can incorporate and change the entire roadmap based on this technology. I don't know, let's call it AI for lack of a better term, right? And your whole world is gonna change based on the fact that we discovered that AI is actually it's more expensive to sell than anything else, so then we're gonna incorporate it and charge you for it, right?
Right. Then what happened to my contract that I signed 2 years ago that said you weren't going to do that?
Bingo. That's the question I was going to. Then what happens? Then there's no real lock-in essentially if that happens, because at the moment that they change the parameters,
You're
then
done.
everything changes.
Right. The reality here is that I can shout lock in from the top of every mountaintop, and as a vendor, I can sit here and say, "But you're locked in. You're locked in. You're locked in." But you said it. The minute that roadmap changes so dramatically that everything that you agreed to 2 years ago no longer exists. I mean, you and I
Yeah.
have both seen it. Vendors who 3 years ago signed a contract and then they're all of a sudden like, "Yeah, but we're going to deprecate that product within 3 years." And you're like, "But I haven't even finished implementing yet." Right? Like,
Yeah.
okay.
So
So contracts break, and so I think there's a legality issue around contracts.
there's a good question here from Jesus. Let's see if I can make this work. Holy shit, technology and I get along today.
Look at that.
And I love this concept because it also talks to what you're talking about. Because I mean, when we change the manner of the contract from locked in, vendor locked in, to transactional driven or
Yeah,
consumption driven, the contract is different now, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And I think that it comes back to the paradigm of how you think of customer success and when does customer success start? Does it start before, right? Does that conversation and that business value assessment happen before you sign the contract? And is then the rest of that built on a subscription basis where you can toggle and change and shift? Where, hey, yes, we as the vendor are tossing in the what it's going to take for year one to make sure that this honeymoon phase is awesome. But years
Yeah.
2 and 3, here's a subscription model that you have so that you don't have variable costs. You don't have surprise bills at the end of it. You don't have to go in and build the SI or bring in 3 different bubblegum things to kind of patch everything together. That we scale when your problem needs to scale. And I think that would have probably made that pandemic scenario that we're talking about look and feel an awful lot different, right? So
I thought I
if you
thought I
were
thought
on
we agreed it was a divorce, not a
it was
pandemic.
a
But okay.
divorce. But think of it this way. Imagine if the reason why you were getting divorced was because you just couldn't handle the 5 kids that you had. But you had a
Yeah.
subscription model that allowed you to bring in 5 nannies during the pandemic. And
You
maybe
see
you had
that, but
more.
I
Or
love that. So I love that. That's a great point, right? I mean, really, that's a great point. If you have that, then you don't need a 3 to 5 year contract, because the contract is you use elasticity before,
yeah,
my word if not yours, but use elasticity and flexibility, right? So we're really heading for elastic contracts that will remove the concept of vendor locked in by contract, not by vendor locked in by length of
by
implementation,
necessity or
investment, whatever.
criticality.
But
Yeah.
it's not an imposed. It's like I hate to. I don't have any good example that I can share in public worlds. I mean, why would you buy the cow if you can get the milk, type of thing? But I mean, could we
you
move
know,
away from a marriage to a long-term
an
partnership
open marriage,
where
you know,
with independence built in?
we fluid. Um, you know,
There you
um,
go, fluidity in
is
relationships.
there fluidity? Yeah, we've gone from flexibility to elasticity to fluidity. I don't know. Because I think that it, when I think back to all of the organizations where I've had to make these technology decisions, I would say that the muscle memory of the consistency of a contract is not easy to give up.
Okay.
And it's not because we couldn't envision a world in which outcomes are so great that we are loyal to as opposed to contractually obligated to, right? I,
Okay.
I think we all want to be in that world where we're like, oh my God, this solution is so amazing. I could never imagine leaving it, right? It's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but there are certain parts of our organization that crave, if not demand, the consistency of the line item, the consistency of the contract, the legal, and risk mitigation of a contract. So I don't necessarily know. I do think that we're starting to see some models evolve and change. And I think that when we start to see those, you start to look at different metrics as your outcomes, right? So, meaning you don't look at TCO, you don't look at that total cost of ownership from the perspective of how much it costs me to implement as opposed to how much does it cost me to operate. You start to look at those business value outcomes of, could I service more customers? Did I streamline my supply chain? Did I look at, like, you can start to interrogate your business differently to come to different value metrics. It's really
So
hard
are
to do.
you change your decision making from financially driven to outcome driven?
Outcome driven is usually financially driven because it's usually bottom line profit driven,
No,
right?
it's a very different. It's a different management style. I mean, financially driven, your
Yeah.
CFO and procurement are like hasty to make pay as
Oh
little
yeah.
as possible. Where outcome driven is like money is not the issue. The value derived is the issue, and they're
It's
very
the
different models.
it is very different models, and it requires a different financial benchmark along the way, right? Because you and I have talked about this before, right? Which is, are you just looking at profit or are you looking at margin? I can sit there and look at profit all day, but if your margin is increasing, you're not actually making more money, right? Like, so I can look at revenue. I think at the end of the day, everyone involved, including the CFO and including procurement, has to be involved in articulating what value is. And that's the metric that's changing. That's the model that's changing. Value in the near term might be, again, I'm here with a bunch of contact center folks, so I'll use contact center as an example. It might be I have way too many expenses in my contact center, and I need to figure out a way to bring these costs down. Well, the biggest line item you have is your people. So the most kind of, the knee jerk reaction is we'll cut 400 people because you have AI now. So you go ahead and do that. So you sign this contract that says, I have AI now. I can cut 500 people from my roster and look how much money I saved. But then you don't realize the value of that because all of a sudden your client satisfaction is pummeling. You don't have anyone answering questions. You're not getting renewals. So it becomes really hard because you haven't set those near-term value metrics along with that long-term strategy. So again, 3-year contract is great because it forces you to look out 3 years. But oftentimes when we set up those 3-year contracts, we haven't set up the near term 90-day, 120 quarter, year. We haven't set up all the other benchmarks in between that lead to value. We leave the benchmarks up ahead as projects. Did I hit this? Did this person get their thing turned on? We didn't use that same value metric that you use at the end as mini markers along the way. Okay, there, I think. Can you hear me? Nope, I've lost Esteban. I am so sorry. Now it's me. Uh-oh. Yep, I think you're going to have to excuse me. The problem is I can't hear Esteban. I can't hear you, Esteban. Sorry. Hang on. Maybe there?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Hear me now? No?
Oh, yes.
Okay. You got it?
Yes.
Something.
Sorry.
That's okay. Something happened with my microphone, and like I had to change microphones. So hopefully you can
There
hear me.
you are.
There you go. Good. Let's finish this then.
Okay, let's do this.
I mean, seriously, gods don't want to have this conversation.
They really don't want us to have this conversation.
So that's okay. Let's try to finish with this other microphone and then figure out what happened later. So what we were going for was the fact that, like, I was saying, we talk about making decisions based on financial considerations. We talk about the 3-year, 5-year commitment. We talk about the vendor lock-in, and then we were talking about it like something completely different. We're talking about like the cloud brings a different model, the ability to actually make flexible decisions, elastic and fluid decisions, and all that. And then Jesus said, and I thought it was a great comment, and hopefully I can put this back in. Jesus said, can we get away from the 3 and 5 year contract because of transactions and consumptions, right? Which is a really good idea. So then that's where we are. Let's say that we have a way out of the vendor locked-in. Is this the way out of the vendor locked-in where we have like different metrics, different models, different setups?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think the most important part there is, do you have, we have the model for subscription services, right? We have it. We like the model. We all sign up for it. And we all know we have models where we become so dependent on that subscription, on that service, that we don't leave, right? So, but I think with the lock-in, there's a false sense of security that can often come from that lock-in. I think that's the mindset we need to shift, right? I think that where I really like the model of a subscription-based, flexible path to success with a vendor is that I may never have the right team to make that solution work perfectly. I may never hire the right people, but if I have that flexible subscription where I know I need on-demand expertise, I need on-demand talent, and I can kind of flex my subscription to say, okay, I know that in Q1, my year subscription is this, but I got to front load all of that into Q1 to make this near-term 90-day success happen. Suddenly value gets, every value point is a sprint. And that kind of feels really attractive, especially in really complex implementations. Again, if I go back to that ERP mindset, right? That's really complex. It feels hard in today's fast-moving, agile, cloud, like all the words, right? AI. It feels really hard to continue to reconcile 5 years, 3 years of lock-in a world where everything else is really flexible and focused on my value, not the vendors. And I think we've had a lot of incarnations of people saying, like, let's go back to your fundamental definition of experience. It's about how I feel. But the vendor is all about how they feel. Right.
But this is exactly a conversation I wanted to have. I mean, there's a model that's in place that is rigid and flexible, benefits both equally, but I would say 30% benefit, not 50-50, but 30-30 with a 40% that is, nobody benefits, right? And can we move to a 50-50 or better, layout based on flexibility, based on the cloud, based on transactions, value, and things like that? Do you think that's a great way to spend the last 10-15 minutes of the show? So do you think that's possible? Are we moving in that direction? Are you seeing something to that effect?
I am. I'm seeing some vendors want to move in that direction, right? Because I think there's a lot of ways that you and I can articulate from the buyers and from the user's point of view how the vendor lock-in can feel super oppressive. But I also think that a lot of vendors are beginning to feel that oppression and that state of this isn't working for us, right? And I would say it's primarily because some of those kind of mid-sized players. If I'm a ginormous company and I've got hundreds of thousands of customers, lock it in all day, baby, right? Like they're not going to care. But I think what we're seeing is some of those really interesting organizations that are realizing that the vendor lock-in wasn't really that valuable for them either. And they're also pushing to this more elastic model that has subscriptions that might have, 1 year benchmarks, but isn't setting everyone up for disappointment.
1 year benchmark, but isn't setting up everybody for the same, you said?
For disappointment, right? Because when you
Ah.
look at that, when you look back, when it comes back to the account review time and everyone's like, okay, well, you didn't grow 30% like you said you were going to, and you throw your arms up and your customer's like, pandemic, dude.
Yeah, but
Hard conversation.
how realistic? Forget the pandemic. How realistic are some of the metrics that you start the year with? I mean, how arbitrary versus realistic, right? I mean, we grew 8% last year, but next year we're going to grow 30%.
Right.
How the fuck are you going to do that? I mean, if you
How are
couldn't
you gonna-
figure out the last 10 years how to do it, a
Right.
vendor's not going to make the difference, right? So
Right. But I mean, you've been on that side though. So I'm gonna turn the tables on you. Like, I mean, you've been on that vendor side of saying, okay,
I don't recall, Senator.
I cannot affirm or recall.
I don't recall, Senator. I don't have the answer to that. I'm sorry.
Well,
yes.
I mean, pretend you do. Because there were probably more times than not that you wanted to go fire your customer, but you've got a 3-year contract.
You can't fire a customer, dude. Not on the vendor side, you can never fire a customer. As a provider, I was able to fire 2 customers in my 20+ year experience for different reasons. But as a vendor, you cannot fire a customer because it's not that you cannot replace it. It's just that once you fire one, everybody aligns behind it to leave you because how could you,
Right. So it's like it ends up like mutually assured destruction. Sometimes when you're talking about lock-ins, right? So I do think that you're starting to see some of those organizations come through with really different metrics. I mean, I've been there's an organization that's very specifically I have in mind that has been that I've had a chance to kind of do some research on and I'll have something coming out shortly on it, which has really started to change where they start the conversation for that contract. And sometimes it's at the RFP level where they're going and doing a full value assessment and a full they're doing a full value plan at the RFP level. And then so now they've got the whole process in place, this is everything you need to do to get to this level of value. And this is what needs to happen. And here's who needs to be involved. And even if that client goes and chooses a completely other vendor, they walk away with this assessment. It's a huge risk for this organization, right? To invest in this type of assessment. But when they are able to execute it, they're looking at those sprints. They're looking at that value. They're defining value in their customers' terms. And I think it's going to, as people experience it, change what the expectation of success is. And they're not going to have to count on that lock-in. They're going to count on that subscription value to keep their revenue rolling. So, I think there will be some cases within the next several years where we'll see vendors who are doing it successfully. And maybe that starts to become the expectation.
So if customers were to expect that, can vendors deliver to that expectation en masse? You can do it in a reduced number basis, but can you create a scalable program? You can create a scalable program that you can actually deliver to the masses that flexibility.
And the cynic in me wonders whether that the word and where the sticking point becomes scalable. Right, because I
have 450,000 customers. It better be scalable because I'm not going to create 450,000 individual contracts and solutions, right?
Exactly, and I think that becomes the worry. That becomes the reason why vendors are like, nope, not even going to consider anything else, anything different.
Wow, that's pretty sad, isn't it?
I think it is, but I think that that's why we're seeing a lot of kind of very specific parts of the industry turn into commodities where, if you don't have to do anything with it, if you know that you don't have to actually change or it's not a mission critical thing, you're just going to buy it like, I got internet.
So now you're hitting my pet peeve on like most of these technology markets, which are essentially a technology market is from inception to commodity. The times are shortening, right? I mean, we used to do like 10, 20 years. We do the 5 to 10, then we did 3 to 5. Now we are seeing fucking technologies that go from zero inception to death in 6 months.
Yeah.
let's call it metaverse for lack of a better term, or whatever you want to call it.
My soul. Yeah.
but seriously, you're seeing
Right.
things that go from like they didn't even enter the consciousness of reality to like,
Right.
we're not going to care about it anymore. So then we're putting all the pieces together that basically speak to a bigger problem than vendor lock-in, which is like, the fuck do you do as a vendor? Because I mean, technology moves fast. Inception to destruction, inception to commodity could be like, less than 2 years these days, right? And like customers have expectations of like, customization and success. Metrics are changing, models are changing. So we got 7 to 9 minutes. Let's flip it. We talk about what the customer is, but what is it the vendor going to do in these situations? And I'm not just talking about enterprise vendors. I mean, pick anybody you want. What is like, what is T-Mobile, Verizon Wireless, and Sprint gonna do? I don't know. Sprint's still around, or the Verizon? Mint Mobile, whatever.
Mint Mobile, yeah.
What's Ryan gonna do with his like millions of customers to get away from vendor lock-in? I mean, and that's actually a bad example because Mint Mobile came in with like no contracts in a world where like contracts were the basis for everything. Right,
but they were able to enter that conversation because T-Mobile did it first, right? T-Mobile, the uncarrier, remember that whole conversation? We're the uncarrier, we don't have contracts, we're going to do this, but you still sign a contract.
So then that's not
don't sign in the old contract, which said your phone number stays here, your phone stays here. You start to shift and change what the value exchange is between the provider and the contract. But I think your example is an amazing one because it's a cautionary tale to not do what the telco industry has done for generations, it feels like now, which is rehash the same conversation with different words, right? Telcos, especially mobile providers, have been in this 30-year conversation of, should I just be a dumb pipe? Is that all I'm doing? You pay me more, I open up the pipe more. Right? The dumb pipe conversation has been around and is an endless conversation. Whether you have a contract for it, whether you don't have a contract for it, whether it's a subscription for you to be a dumb pipe or it's a contract for you to be a dumb pipe, still a dumb pipe. So the question becomes, what's the value at the end of that? And is the value really that you got more speed, or is the value that you got less cost? So again, it goes for the same conversation again.
That's a red herring. The conversation for the wireless shifted a long time ago when we introduced data to the equation. It did. Let me tell you why. When we introduced data into the equation, the things went away from the pipe to the content that going through the data. If you look at what Verizon is doing this day, it did too.
Your conversation changed. Your conversations about it changed. But the telco
me as a customer, or me as a provider. Hold on.
If you're a provider, if you're the vendor, you guess what conversation you have every single damn year you go to Mobile World Congress. Should I be a dumb pipe or should I be a slope? It's the same dumb pipe conversation. Yes, it is.
That's a stupid commodity conversation. This is a great example. We should spend the whole fucking show on mobile providers because they moved away from having a commoditized solution to having the value of the data. Hold on, let me finish. You're not listening. You're not listening. Let me finish. You move away from having to move bits faster to actually being able to look into the bits and get value proposition from profiles and information that you didn't have before, and leverage that fucking value information by distributing to other, creating new business models that you didn't have before. It's a whole different world than it was before. Come on. You
get that literally in 2006, I sat in Barcelona and had that same damn conversation even before the iPhone came out.
You're not gonna go talk
conversation.
I promise you this because I had these conversations. You're not gonna go to an executive team at a wireless provider and talk about bandwidth and bigger pipes. I promise you, 1,000,000% you're not gonna have a conversation.
No. You're not gonna go talk to them about, but guess what they're talking to each other about?
No, they're talking to each other about how to get more money out of it, like how to become a bigger hegemony within the commoditized market that they created.
Have to become, do we charge more for it? Do we charge less for it? It's the same dumb pipe conversation. They just recast it every single time. Except we expect them to be having a different conversation because we see all the data they have. We see all the different business models they have. We see all the different content. Instead of calling it over the top, they just call it content now. Same conversation about wanting to bat things down from the sky. But the argument is very true of now all of a sudden you have someone from Mint Mobile who's like, I'm going to rent your pipe because I don't care. Right? I'm going to rent your pipe and I'm going to actually deliver the business value and deliver the business model that customers actually want at a lower price, and I'm going to make more money. And it confuses the whole damn market.
But you're not okay. Let me contrast two things here. We got a couple of minutes. I have time if you have time. So I don't mean to end at an hour, but I can go forever in this. But I mean, let me give you two different parts of that discussion. The model that you just presented, right? Wireless provider A. Let's not pick on anybody because they're all the same. Versus Mint Mobile, right? Mint Mobile came and said, "I'm gonna rent your shit, and I'm gonna make a 10%." Markup on top of that, or whatever the number is. I don't know what the number is. It's more than 10%. Otherwise, it wouldn't work, right? But I'm paying $10. I'm paying $10 for a service, and I'm going to charge $15 for service. And from the $15, half goes to my infrastructure, and half goes to like profit. Fucking awesome model, but it's an outdated model because infrastructure is cheap. I mean, this is why the hyperscalers exist in the cloud world.
Whoa. What infrastructure is cheap? Define what you're including in infrastructure. For, let's say, the actual carrier who has fiber in the ground, delivering the towers, that infrastructure, that CapEx is very
different the same carrier?
Than what
is this the same carrier?
Is
this the same carrier that's charging 10 to 15% in like fees within their bills to to maintain that infrastructure? Infrastructure is cheap.
What infrastructure is cheap?
The fiber on the ground, the switching stations, the cell towers.
Huh? When did towers become cheap to operate?
Towers become cheaper and cheaper. It's the law of the numbers and technology. Things get cheaper over time with better technology emerges. We used to have like one fucking station for every single cell tower. Now we can have one station for 20 or 30 cell towers. So there's like but that's not the point. The point was like okay. Go with my assumption for a second. Infrastructure is a sunk cost. How about that? Instead of cheap. Right? It's a sunk cost. It is. I mean, come on. In any commodity building, the infrastructure is a sunk cost. Your goal is to reduce the cost as much as possible, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So then Mint Mobile is actually making a play on the sunk cost and if I pay you for your sunk cost and I make a little markup on top of that, I can make a good business, and they do make a great business on top of that. Yeah. Right? There's no question. But here comes a wireless provider that said, hey, forget the infrastructure. It's going to be there no matter what. We still have to carry data. We still have to carry voice. I mean, in today's world, it's all data anymore. It's digital voice, right? But we still need to carry data. We still need to carry voice. We need to have, cell towers everywhere. We need to connect them to a network global. We need to have powerful pipes and all that. That's a sunk cost. So how do we make more money on top of that? And I think that this just shifted from vendor to locked into a whole different conversation, by the way.
Yeah, totally different conversation. We're not talking about finish anymore.
But it's still fun. So then how do I make more money on top of that? I know I'm going to sell subscriptions to things that I really don't give a fuck about and they don't matter. And I'm going to make a markup on top of that. What isn't there a difference between and maybe I'm just cornering myself into the stupid answer that I don't know what I'm talking about, but isn't there a difference between wireless provider A saying, I'm going to sell subscriptions and solutions that I couldn't before for an added markup, and Mint Mobile saying, I'm going to take a 15% profit from the cost of infrastructure that I don't have to pay for? Isn't there a difference in those two? And if there is, and here's the last question because we're kind of at the end. If there is, doesn't that affect the vendor lock-in issue for both vendor and provider, and then affects the decision making? And I take my response offline.
Only if the value that the customer is looking for is wrapped up in vendor A. So if the customer is like, oh, you know what I really want? I want a ton of subscription-based content feeds. I want a bunch of pay-per-view fights that I don't have to pay for, blah, blah, blah. The over-the-top, because all the over-the-top content that I can only get exclusively through wireless carrier A, right? And I can't get it through Mint Mobile. All I can get through Mint Mobile is data on my phone and voice, right? For this subscription price. But I want all this other stuff. Then yes, the value exchange with wireless carrier A, great new business model. Here's the problem. That business model didn't work in 2005. It didn't work in 2015. It's not going to work right now because the content that they can't deliver, they can't produce it on their own. So all of a sudden, you've now turned content into an infrastructure cost because they're not creating their own content. They're licensing it from other people. They created this balloon of cost that you could never actually get the value exchange to work. So what did everyone go do? They went to Mint Mobile and they went to Netflix, right? And that's the combo they did.
That I mean, to try to wrap up
Why
to
go into the
seemingly
lock-in, bringing it back,
that's what I'm saying. Trying to make it a cohesive show. That is exactly the fluidity, elasticity, and flexibility that we started with. That is going to affect the decision making. And we're out of time, unfortunately. And I know you had to go and like have lunch and all these things.
Topic.
I know, but that was actually a fun conversation. We should do more of that shit. Should be more instruction. The instruction part was the best part. So, Liz, thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, my friend.
It was really good and everything. Let's talk again soon. For those of us following, I'm going to end the stream now. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week when we start talking about transmedia. Have a good week, everybody.